I'm Charlotte Dubin. I'm conducting an oral history interview with Penny Blumenstein for the Leonard N. Simons Jewish Community Archives at the Max M. Fisher Federation Building on May 23, 2005. Mrs. Blumenstein, do we have permission to use your words and thoughts in the future for educational and historical research and documentation?
Yes, you do.
Let's start at the very beginning. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan, December 10th, 1939, at what was then Women's Hospital. It's probably had 3 names since then. And my father's family actually was from Detroit. I even have a grandmother who was born in Detroit. And my mother's family was from Cleveland, and she married my father and moved here. And they lived here for all of my life, up until the time, I shouldn't even say that. Can we go back for a second? All right. Certainly not all of my life, because I intend to be living a lot longer yet. My parents are both 90 this year. My father was 90 in February, and my mother will be 90 in July, and we're having a 180th birthday party for them in June. And they had a long and very active life here in Detroit. They moved when my father was 65, so they moved to Florida at that time permanently to Florida. Then on, they didn't stay permanently in Florida, but that's where they reside now. They moved again to Texas for a while, where my father opened a new business, and now live in Florida. But they had a very active life, and one that I would have to say really gave me the grounding for everything that I did later. They were both active in the community, and it was a tradition that I would have to say came even from my grandparents. Both of my grandmothers in their own communities were very active, and my grandfathers were really participating on a very high level in their communities. And it just was kind of traditionally the things that you did when you could. And it was what gave me the impetus to move into the world of tzedakah, really, because everything that they did was related to that.
Who are you named for?
I'm named for a great-grandmother. My Hebrew name is Basha Esther, and my original name was not Penny. My original name was Brooke, very romantic and English or something, that my mother was probably very romantic while she was pregnant with me, and she was looking for a bee. But somehow I wasn't quite a Brooke when I came out. I kind of was more round, bald, and not fair as my brother had been. So the picture of the baby that she was going to have did not fit the name she chose. So they nicknamed me Penny, which was a name from a movie, I think, that they had seen while she was pregnant with me. And it just seemed to fit, and they called me Penny. And when I went to school, in those days, you didn't have to have 17 pieces of identification to affirm your name and birth date. And so they enrolled me as Penny, and I went all the way through school that way. I didn't change my name legally until after I had had 3 children and listed them as having Mother Penny on their birth certificates, and decided that someday they might have a problem, because legally there was no Penny. And I have subsequently become legally Penny Brooke. But now Brooke is a much more popular name, probably fits a variety of people and their appearance. So today perhaps it would have been more fitting, and you would have known me as Brooke.
Tell me what life was like in your home growing up.
Well, I come from actually a pretty big family. I have 2 brothers and a sister. We had a very close family. We still do. It's a wonderful family. My father was a CPA, and after many years of being one of the top small Jewish firms, well, it was the largest of the small firms in this community. He decided that he wanted to go into business and did a variety of things that took him far further than being a CPA. That's going to keep going. So do you want to stop it for a second? Sorry, I don't remember where I was exactly. My father.
Right.
Okay. So, but we had a family that was very, we did a lot of things together, even though there was a very large spread in our ages, because there's 11 years difference between my oldest brother, and my youngest sister. And yet, we did take, family vacations, and we went to the same camps, and we did all kinds of things as family. We were very close to my grandparents who lived here, to my aunts and uncles, and to my mother's family in Cleveland. We traveled to Cleveland quite often. My mother had a sister and her parents, and it was that kind of family. And then we had our extended family, since there weren't as many aunts and uncles who lived here, of a whole group of my parents' friends who became part of our family. They had their children, and we all did things together. It was a nice time to grow up. It was a time of feeling comfortable and safe. I don't think I was at all aware of the Jewish side of life in a public sense, where there would have been problems with being Jewish. My parents had certainly experienced it very often. I could tell you long stories about how they experienced it, both when they were first married and looking for apartments here, and when my mother went to University of Michigan and was looking for housing, and many things that they never made us aware of. We were very comfortably Jewish, in those years. You grew up fairly much in a Jewish neighborhood, even if it wasn't completely Jewish. So from our first home that was in the Dexter-Davison area till when we moved to the 7 Mile Livernois area, everybody practically at school seemed to me to be Jewish, at least the majority, and we were a comfortable majority at that time. It was a different world than what my children grew up in. That's why I'm so happy now that my grandchildren are having a more Jewish experience here at Hillel than they would if they were in public school.
Who are your friends?
Who are my friends? Oh, you will know so many of my friends. I have friends that we started practically, well, some of them were still from kindergarten, but when you talk about some of my friends that you would know, Doreen Herman and Margie Krasnick and Blumenstein, we all knew each other since we were about 8 or 9 years old. We have remained friends, and it's always a reflection to me of who I am and who I was when I realize that so many of my friends have the same kind of caring and interest for community, and it's always astounding. People are astounded by the fact that we have a group of friends that we have celebrated our major birthdays with. There are about 18 of us that were all friends, at least from high school, and many of them, as I say, from even before. In fact, I have friends from kindergarten. And most of my other friends today are friends very often of people who I met through Federation. Nancy Grossfeld, I would have to say, is one of my very best friends. We met through Federation, through the women's department, because she was the person who followed me as the chair of the Lion of Judah division. And it began just an incredible friendship, and our husbands became friends. And we have very interwoven lives today. I have to say also I have some very wonderful, strong relationships with men. Not everybody has men friends, but I have some friends who are men. Maybe it started with David Herman and Avashalom, that he wasn't just Harold's friend, and we weren't just friends as couples. He was my friend, and I was his friend. And there are other people who are like that I have a very close relationship with, which has been really, it's wonderful to have perspective from the whole as opposed to the part, because men have different ways of looking at things. It's helped me a lot in many of the things that I've done, because because you can't think in a narrow box when you take leadership position. You have to look at the whole, not the part, and that's helped me a lot.
Was there someone who particularly influenced you growing up? Someone you looked up to?
Growing up, well, I would have to say it's just the subtle influence of my parents. I have really extraordinary parents. They're very different in nature. My father was maybe the quiet, calm leader person. People depended upon my father a great deal. He's extraordinarily trustworthy. And my mother was a personality who was fun-loving, definitely committed, a great mother. I mean, mothering was her job, and even though we battled a great deal, as teenagers are wont to do with their mothers, when I was growing up, intuitively I knew, that she, first of all, my mother's just an absolute lady. She's one of these people who, she's a classic lady, but not without a sense of humor, not without a reality check. She's not a forbidding person. And just ask Harold about her sometime. He absolutely adores her. I think that's why he married me. So I think that my parents were probably my largest influence. I had a grandfather, my mother's father, whom I just absolutely adored. You know how there's like certain people in your life. On both sides, I had one grandparent that were more models for me than the other, just because they were these very calm, reasonable people who were, I was not such a calm and reasonable person. And they gave me a real sense of being able to cope with situations in life, of having a reasonable outlook about things. My grandmother, who unfortunately died when she was 67, she just had the gentlest soul. She was, talk about a lady, she was also such a lady. And in those years when I was growing up, I spent a lot of time with her. Not because she ever lived with us, because she didn't. Just that she was the kind of person you liked to go to her house and be with her. And that extended beyond my childhood into my young adulthood. And she was a great example for anybody to follow.
How about Jewish content in your life? Did you go to a Jewish school?
Oh, yeah, well, we were members of Shared Tzedek from the very early times. My grandfather was a member, my father was a member. It was a typical 40s, 50s Jewish education. I don't know how much I learned, but I went the required amount of time. I went through confirmation. There were no bat mitzvahs at that time, so you didn't really have the ability to, take a real role in the synagogue or the synagogue life. I would have to say, consecration, which at that time you had to be 16. That was the extent of it. Very few of us continued on to graduate. I can't say I had a great Jewish education. It was just that I learned the required amount to get through from one year to the other. It was just, it was one of those things you had to do, you did it. It didn't make me particularly knowledgeable, nor did it make me feel particularly connected. I happen to have loved Rabbi Adler and Goldie because they were just dear people. They were friends of my grandparents also, so I saw them on a more intimate level than maybe everyone would have. And my father was very active at Shared Tzedek. And had they stayed in Detroit, he would have been president of Shared Tzedek, but they had decided to move, which I would have to say my mother wasn't that unhappy about at the time, because it really, Shared Tzedek wasn't her life. She was much more involved in Jewish women's organizations and also in the March of Dimes, because my sister had polio. And so she really got involved in the March of Dimes at the very earliest. I marched for the March of Dimes from the time I was about 15 or 16 every year until I got married, and even after that, if somebody would call me, I would make the calls or do the walk, whatever. So.
Was that your earliest volunteer experience?
Actually, probably was. Yes. And I remember that, if my mother wasn't, it was particularly important if my mother didn't happen to be in town when they were doing the walk. She knew somebody was out there doing it. And it, really taught you to care, because when you have situations within your own family that you can relate, you understand that raising money for people who don't have it is really important. Because when my sister had polio, they came right to the hospital and talked to my parents and offered all kinds of assistance, which my parents didn't happen to need much of it, but that was a wonderful experience for them, because they knew that there were people who really did need it. So, yeah, I think that was a great lesson.
We're going to come back to that a little bit, because I think your role as a volunteer is going to be important to us. But for a moment, I'd like you to tell us about your education. Where did you go to high school and afterward?
Oh, well, I went to Mumford, the high school to go to in the 50s. And then I went to the University of Illinois. But Harold and I were going together already, and our phone bills were far exceeding our capacity to cover them. I remember getting a very lovely birthday check from my grandmother for my 18th birthday and having to pay my phone bill with it. That was not such a good thing, and I subsequently decided that I would come back to Detroit. It was really kind of silly. I wanted the experience of being away. I knew it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. If I didn't take advantage of it then, I never would. And I was glad that I did it. But I was happy to come back, and then I went to Wayne. And I went to Wayne for about another year and a half. And then I was pregnant with my first child. I had gotten married, and it was a very fast track. I got married 10 days after my 19th birthday. Harold was 20. We were very young, but we had been going together already for a couple of years, and I guess marriage was, that was the option then. And in order to keep him out of the Army, we hurried to have our first child, which we did. I got pregnant, and somewhere in the very first few months of that next semester, I decided, I think I'm not feeling that great. I think when I have this baby, I'm going to stay home. So I never finished. What I did was I continued taking classes of all sorts for a long, long time. I was never focused about what I took, so I never made an attempt to put it together to add to my college credits. At that time, it wasn't that important. I didn't need a college degree to do what I was doing, which was parenting, and I didn't need a college degree to learn things, because I was learning things in all these classes that I was taking and enjoying it, and I didn't worry about final exams. I just learned. Actually, I had a much better time then than I did earlier on. And I was a pretty good student, but it's great when you learn and there's no pressure and you're just there because you enjoy it. So I would have to say the rest of my life has been an education. I did go back and I was doing some accounting work for one of Harold's father's little businesses, and I went back and took some accounting courses. I think I took some of Harold's accounting courses. I did the homework when he was too busy. But life is an education, and there are times when I go to fill out forms where I say to myself, oh, I wish I could say, yes, I got a degree from the university. But I could always go back and finish if I wanted. I've read all those marvelous stories of people who are 89 years old and getting their college degree. It's not important to me anymore. It was probably, there was this little window of time when it was. But
somewhere along the line in your early married life, you were starting to get interested in volunteering, apparently. And how did that all happen?
Well, actually, I think probably it happens to a lot of women. You're looking for something to do outside your home, where instead of talking about babies And what you're cooking for dinner, you want something that's a little bigger than yourself, something that takes you outside of your little narrow home environment. So in those years, there were a lot of things that you could join as a chapter. Not, I didn't plunge right into Federation. I didn't really even know very much about Federation. And I was actually part of an ORT chapter, which was being organized by neighbors and friends of mine. And they asked me if I would join, and I said, sure, it'd be a good way to give part of myself outside of my home environment and to be with people and talk about things that were important.
Tell us what ORT is.
ORT is the Organization for Rehabilitation Training. Now, that was what it was then. Today, it's much broader because ORT does a lot of teaching, setting up schools in environments where schools aren't available. At that time, what they were doing was to take people and give them new training outside of a field perhaps that they had been in that was no longer in existence, or they had moved, they had become an immigrant to Israel, or they had their life changed considerably in an environment wherever they were, which could have been in any country in the former Soviet Union. And now they have a much broader scope. And what chapters did was raise money and raise consciousness for people about what ORT was doing to encourage more people to support it. But it was also a social environment, and it was a way of people getting together and to really, they were learning about ORT, they were sending out the message about ORT, and they were learning about other things, because along with what we did as far as the raising of funds, which I don't think in the concept of what I know about raising funds today was very much, but it was an effort. We also had speakers would come for different programming, so we could learn about a lot of different things that were going on in our own state or in the world, or that broaden our perspective. And I think that was, for us, it was our rehabilitation training, I suppose you could say. And I had a rule. I would do anything. You could give me any job. I would do anything that they wanted me to do as long as I wasn't the president. I didn't want to be in charge of any whole thing. That was my rule. So I did about everything in the ORT chapter that I could think of to do. And then, Margie was a good friend of mine. That's how I knew Dulcie. Margie Krasnick is Dulcie's sister-in-law. And they were looking for people to become they had a leadership training program within the Women's Department. Now,
Women's Department of what?
Of Federation. And I will tell you that this is what I knew about Federation. One day, my doorbell rang, and some lady was at the door who asked if she could come in and talk to me about giving a gift to Federation. I can picture in my mind that moment. How horrifying. I didn't even have a clue. I didn't have a clue how much I could give, and I didn't even really understand what I would even be giving to. And it was just one of my more uncomfortable moments. But of course, I said, yes, you could come in. It was, in those days, you could answer your door and let somebody come into your house. And we sat in my little family room. I mean, I swear to you, I can't remember who she was, but I remember the moment because I was so frightened. I didn't know what to say. I mean, this was not a decision I was making on my own. We didn't have a great deal of money, believe me. We were strung pretty tight. I had no idea if Harold was even giving money to the Federation himself. I don't remember how old I was, but I was pretty young, but I had been married maybe a couple of years by then. I must have been, because by that time I was in my house, so I must have been married 3 or 4 years, and I probably had 2 kids. And I gave her something. I don't remember whether it was $10 or what, but believe me, my heart was thumping. It could have been $1 million in my mind. And it was not one of my best experiences, not because she wasn't nice, but because I felt uncomfortable. And it didn't take long. Just a year or so later, Dulcie, well, maybe it was a few years later, when Dulcie asked me to become part of this leadership training group, and by that time I had already been active in ORT, so I was out there a little bit more. It was an incredible experience, because you didn't just learn about leadership and how to do things. You learned about what the Jewish Federation was about, and at that time it was the Jewish Welfare Federation, but it was about welfare, and it was something that could directly related to how I felt about what I should, if I were going to be giving my time and energy, it was for people who had less, who needed support. It was my road to leadership. Of course, when I finished that course, they found immediately some opportunity for me to, serve and be on a committee, and I don't even remember where I began. But it was whatever it was just you went from one thing to the other. You learned about different things. Of course, the end result of that was eventually this person who never wanted to be president of anything, I became the president of the women's department. But after, and I had already been the campaign chair for the women's department. I had had many campaign roles. And really and truly what I really got into was the campaign part. From somebody who was so intimidated by somebody asking them for money, I don't know how I became so involved in asking other people for money, but it became my life to ask people for money.
How do you?
How do I ask people for money? Nicely, I hope. I ask people for money for things that I believe in, because I think that if you believe in something and you know how much that money can help, it's not that difficult to ask for money. I've had so many people say to me, I don't know how you do that, that's so horrible. I said, no, it isn't. It isn't, because if you know why you're doing it and you know what it's going to do, it's not that difficult. You also have to take your own ego out of it, because if people refuse you, then you have to say, thank you for listening to me. You can't do this if it's for you. I could never ask for money for myself. But when I ask for money for a cause, for a real reason, then that's a whole different thing. So it isn't about me, and I can't make it about me. I unfortunately know many solicitors who do make it about themselves. I don't ever have a goal in the respect that I have to do so many solicitations, or I have to raise X amount of dollars. What I have to do is try to speak to as many people as I'm either assigned to or find I can reach, and I have to do the best job explaining the need to them. Nobody makes people give money. There was a time in the not so distant past, but distant enough, where people put pressure on other people through their businesses. Now that was really more of the level of men's campaigning. It was the way it was done. It was accepted. Accountants called accountants. People in the tool business called other people in the tool business, and they all pressured each other to give a larger gift, do more, whatever. Women can't do that, number one. Women's attitudes about giving money are different. They give it for different reasons, and they have different ways of accessing their resources. Most women are not nearly as independent about their giving, even though they are the greatest influence in their family. You have to learn a great deal about how people give, why they give, and what do they have to do in order to be able to give. And that there's so many components to that. So for me, I try to look at all that when I'm asking for the money. I believe in quality giving. Everybody I know can't give the same amount I can, or the same amount that their friend can. But if they're giving a quality gift, I think that they can do it. I would have to say, in that respect, David Herman was probably the greatest influence that I ever had in listening to him ask for money. Even if you can't do it exactly the way he does, you could listen to him and pick up some nuances that made you feel differently about how you would ask and how you should feel while you're asking. Because for him it was a joy, and not everybody has that. There are 2 David Hermans in the world, but we were lucky to have one here, and I was lucky to have him as a friend, as a mentor. He always made people feel good about giving their gift, and that's what I try to do. If you can make people feel good about it, not only will they give you that gift, they'll continue to give. And if they're not giving it to you because you ask, it may be somebody else, but they begin to know how good it feels to give. And that's a real lesson for everybody who, let's say, is in this business. Anybody who does this, listen, it's not because the pay is so good. So you have to have some psychic pleasure out of this. And that's the psychic pleasure. You made somebody else feel good.
When you chaired the campaign, that was 1996, I think.
Oh gosh, yes. I know. It seems so funny. It's so far removed now.
Did you have any special challenges? Community challenges?
No, I don't feel like that particular year, we have many more challenges today. There are always challenges because you're always trying to increase your campaign. I can't say there were specific challenges. I did the major gifts portion. It was an experience, doing the major gifts portion, not because it was more difficult. I think it's easier. I think people who are used to giving money, who have been giving more substantial amounts of money, are easier to speak to. I believe it's much easier to solicit men than it is to solicit women, because men have a very specific idea about their parameters. So when you're talking to them, they already know a great deal about how much they plan to give. And you can move them from that amount, but they understand, and they don't consult with anybody. They're making a decision based on their knowledge of their own means. And what you can do is to encourage them to increase their perspective. And I found it to be, in that sense, an easier campaign than when I when I did my campaign work in the women's department. There are certain variables that you can take off the table. Women who don't feel as comfortable about giving large amounts of money. Do you know there are many women in our women's department who are capable of giving much larger amounts of money, but they don't feel comfortable being a woman doing that. It's one of the reasons why Harold and I long ago have discussed the fact that, partly because of my activities, but that it was important for me to take as much of our gift, because let's face it, I don't care whether it's a women's campaign or a men's campaign or a woman's gift, which we know is very important because we're counted and it's important. It's still going to be a decision a family makes, by and large. But it's important for women to say, I can step up to the plate, and I'm not only capable of giving a large gift, I have the right to give that large gift. But it's a harder concept, and not everybody has a husband like mine. So I understand that, but I do make that larger gift in my name so that women can say, oh, well, my gift is really good, but if I raise it a little bit, I'm not going to be over the top. And it's a balance. But campaigning is hard every year, only in the respect that you're always trying to achieve more. You're always trying to you know that more is going to be needed. So it's difficult, but it's everybody's challenge.
You were president of the women's department in 1993 to 1995. Did you have some role models?
Oh, did I have role models? My best role models are, just turn and look at the past presidents that we have in the women's department. And not only were they excellent and kept the women's department like in the forefront of what we do at the Federation, they are still active. Women's department leadership does not leave when they're finished. They stay there, they're there for advice, they support activities. It's an incredible scenario. And I think maybe I realized that as I was the women's department campaign chair, because those women were still actively soliciting for the women's department. Who better could tell the story about what we do and why we do it and why it's important to do it as women than past campaign and presidents from the women's department. So I had a number of role models. Certainly people like Dulcie was a role model. Edith Jacquier was a role model. Tilly Brandwine. I mean, I remember when Tilly won the Butzel. It was like, oh my goodness, there is like my idol. She is a woman who has such it wasn't even that I was looking to go beyond the women's department. It was that she had such a broad following because she had done in her very quiet, firm way so much that she could be honored by the whole of Federation. Who else would I want to be like besides Tilly? I mean, that is, and quietly effective. I think that she was a great role model for me. But I could, if I had a list, I could probably go back and name so many of the women that went back a little farther than I did. Certainly my immediate past presidents, because they were so helpful, and everybody stays and they really, pull together as a team. But I would have to say that those three women were women that I could look to for examples of how it is to be a really good leader.
Do you feel a responsibility to help women become leaders in the community?
I do. First of all, I think women are really more effective in many leadership roles than men. I love our guys, but women, first of all, will take more time and put in more energy, sometimes just simply because they have more time and energy. They don't have as many dual roles to play. We've had many wonderful presidents in our federation, but they all had full-time jobs. And I remember when I became president, Harold said to David Page, "I'm seeing Penny spend so much time doing this. How did you do this?" He said, "Who said I had time to do my real job?" Because that's what would happen. You have to give up something. But I didn't have to give up anything. I just managed to be here on a regular daily basis. And I think that women could really do this job in a very effective way. It's more difficult to get them to stand up to it, to say, I want to do this, or I would do this. And that's something that I keep encouraging many of the women who have leadership positions here, because they're very effective in the leadership positions that they have, both within women's department, obviously, but also in the General Federation. You'll notice we always have a strong number of women vice presidents, and they are truly effective. Sometimes they're a little more reticent to take on the rest of the Federation world, and they don't realize that just by being a good leader, you don't have to be, this is not a war. This is a matter of just asserting yourself in the positions and at the moments where you need to. And I always encourage them in their roles to speak up. I generally encourage people anyway to speak up. You know, within any organization, there are people who see things with a different perspective, or they see things in a new light. I always encourage those people who speak to me to please make sure that they speak to the appropriate people about that, because good organizations come from having a number of people who are willing to invest not only their energy, but also their intellect. And you can't do that unless you also use your mouth. Because if you don't tell people what you're thinking, and you don't bring it into the mix of decision making, then a good organization can become very weak very quickly. So I always encourage women to do this, because they are, as I say, more reticent to speak their mind. And I guess that was just something, I never thought about it. Nobody said to me I couldn't do this. I figured if I had the position, then I had the voice. And this was long before I became the president. But if I were going to have the position, I was going to have the voice, because what was the point? I wasn't some figurehead. You know, I don't need to be that. I wouldn't want to be that. So you take me, you take the whole of me. And I encourage other women to do the same thing. Nobody is going to, people, if you do it in the right way, no one's going to try to get rid of you because you're a woman. Doing it in the right way, I would have to say, is, as for anybody, is the most effective way of getting your voice heard. So being strident isn't necessarily effective. You can't always be negative. You have to look at things in a positive way. But you have to have it, you have to be able to say what's on your mind in a way that's not necessarily confrontational. You know, I am not a confrontational person. In fact, I really hate confrontation. But I do believe in fairness, and I believe in firmness. When I became president, I don't know if it was Bob or Mark who kind of identified me. I'm the one with the Bob Aronson and Mark Davidoff. I'm the one with the velvet hammer. Well, okay, but it's the hammer, because it's important to be able to be firm. If you have a true viewpoint, you can't back off just because somebody disagreed with you. So that's an important thing. But my mother-in-law, Vishalom, said, you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. And that has been one of my watchwords. There's always a nice way to say no. There's a nice way to say we need to change this. There's a nice way to say this is my viewpoint. Whatever it is, you can say it very nicely. But you need to say it. And you need to be assured that saying it is more important and more effective than not.
One position where you had an important voice was as chair of the Strategic Plan Action Committee. That was in 1992
Right.
to 6, I think, 96. Tell us a little bit about that.
You know, that was probably one of the greatest learning experiences of my whole Federation life, because there was no aspect of Federation that we didn't cover in the strategic plan. And so I learned about everything that was going on here and how we operated. We were making a lot of changes, which I think, you know, were really effective. We actually need to do that every 10 years or so. It was a huge process. I mean, I'm not recommending it for this moment, but it was a very important part of bringing us into the 20th century. Now we are in the 21st century, which seems like unbelievable to me. But bringing us into the 20th century was really important because we had been operating as the Jewish Welfare Federation, and we changed our name, but we needed to change the way we looked at how we did things, and then we needed to change the way that we did things, because you have to be, first of all, a meaner and leaner organization. People's lives change, opportunities change, and we had to be able, we're so much bigger today in what we do, so many different directions that we move in than we were in the initial aspects of this organization. That if we didn't make change, eventually we would have become obsolete. It's difficult enough as it is in this modern Jewish world because there's so many opportunities for people to participate and to donate money in things that are so totally outside the Jewish environment, or there are Jewish organizations that have become bigger and more active that could draw some of our really not only top leadership people away, but also some of our largest donors away. And in fact, you know, you see it a great deal now. Campaign, you know, suffers from the loss of many of our dedicated donors who have unfortunately aged and died, and their families are not necessarily continuing in the tradition, and bringing young people in today who understand the scope and the depth and the meaning of what we do. So the strategic plan was an effort to change our perspective here. We changed departments. We had goals, which I would have to say, by and large, we have met almost all the goals of the strategic plan. There were some that were minor that have kind of folded in, and some of them didn't work, believe me. I mean, I could see, you know, we went through the strategic plan, we went through the implementation, which took far longer than we anticipated, and then we did an evaluation, and some of the things, you know, did not work the way we wanted. But from that came something new. So even if it didn't work in its first iteration, it was still changed enough we could move it someplace else and still have an effective way of dealing with the issues of today. And that's what a strategic plan is all about. How do you go from what you were, maintain your strengths, and move into the future? And I think we did a pretty good job of it. It took a lot of people and a lot of effort, but I really believe that we have an organization today that functions in the real world.
And then you made history.
Oh, yes.
How did it feel becoming the first woman to be president of the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Detroit?
Well, initially it was kind of frightening, like, you know, where you lay in your dark room and you open your eyes and you say, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? And you think, this is too overwhelming, I'm not prepared, I don't have the background, I never ran a business, how am I going to do this? And then you start to do it, and first of all, you have a great support team. We had wonderful professionals, we had wonderful past presidents who were there for advice and effort and didn't leave me hanging in the wind. And then you begin to realize you know a whole lot more than you thought you did. I had great training. You have to look, when you look at my bio and you see what positions I was placed in, obviously I had no idea that I was on a track. Again, this was not my goal. I didn't have a goal to be president of the Federation. It never occurred to me in the years, and especially even when I started with the strategic plan, I had no idea that they had already kind of identified me. When I say they, the powers that be, the president and the past presidents of the time, and the professionals, that they were kind of putting me on a track, and they were giving me an education that would prepare me to be a president. So it was only in reflecting upon where I'd been that I realized how I wouldn't say devious is too strong a word, but how the ulterior motives were in place when they put me in a position of chairing certain areas. That was training that was invaluable to me because of my understanding of how we operated. I think, too, this is a very staff-lay combination organization. Nobody stands alone. Nobody makes a decision alone. There are areas, of course, obviously, that professionals like Bob Aronson as the CEO will make decisions based on the business side of things that he will always ask you about, but it's really his decision to make. That you can't operate a business with people who come and go as presidents do. However, we had a very wonderful working relationship, and you work as a team. By working as a team, things that you thought were impossible happen. You don't ever feel as if you're making a decision without a lot of information. And it was difficult only in the respect that there's so much responsibility and you feel like you are truly the representative of the community and you want everything to be as good as it can be. Perfect is a word I don't think exists in any real world, but you really want it to be as good as it can be. You want to help as many people as you can, and you want the people who depend on you to be their representative, to feel that everything that's going on is on the highest level. I think Jewish standards are always extraordinarily high anyway, but I think that we feel like we have to hold ourselves to the highest level here. So it wasn't as overwhelming as I thought it was going to be after the first, maybe 6 months, only that it was a huge job. I was the first president to have an office that was a real office, and I used it, and I was here every day. That gave me a unique position among most presidents because, first of all, I could do most of my work in the daytime. I had access to all the staff. They had access to me. So we developed great relationships, which I, to this day, value. It was a wonderful experience for me. And I had a very organized life. I focused my life on Federation. I put everything else that I was doing in the background and on hold. I explained to everybody, this is where my life was going to be for 3 years. You could wait for me or not, but I wasn't going to divide myself in little pieces. And it was a great thing. It was actually easier than it was being past president, because now I don't know which meeting to go to. Nobody's organizing my schedule so that if I need to be there, then this meeting will be arranged so that I will be there. And that isn't happening to me now. That's much more difficult.
You mentioned that past presidents were helpful to you. Were there any in particular you want to mention?
Well, certainly my immediate past president, who was Bob Naftali. Bob Naftali was, always there, for advice. And even though he was funny because we used to laugh, we had very different styles. I knew that he knew how everything worked. I knew I could call him. He conferred with me on a regular basis. It was just wonderful. And David Page, who had been the president before that, was amazing because, David is among the most organized people I've ever seen in my life. And he had spent a great deal of time during his 3 years of the presidency not only overseeing the strategic plan implementation and making sure that was all done, and he had been in charge of the original strategic plan, but he had reorganized a lot of the things that were going on in the building to make it a more high-functioning business than it had been before. And that was a great help to me. So I knew that he was a terrific resource on every level that I needed. So David was somebody that I could get a second perspective from, because David and Bob were different. And so very often issues would come up and I would just call them and say, okay, how would you handle this? What was your experience with this? Do you have any other background? And I would call, actually, many times both of them, because you also have to make your own imprint as the president. This isn't some, you can't just fill somebody's shoes and walk in them. You have to make your own path. And by getting perspectives from both of them about how they handled it, eventually I developed my own style. I would have to say, you know, by the third year, I didn't have to call them very often, certainly even by the second, but that first year, when you're really just trying to get your arms around it, trying to develop not only your own sense of style of handling things, you know, which you come in with, but you have to be a little more presidential than you were before. But you also have to develop ideas about how you get from the problem to the solution to the future. So, you know, they tell you that don't worry about what you're going to be doing and leaving as your mark. The first year, just get oriented, which I did. And by the second year, you'll begin to see areas that you feel you really want to change, you want to have more impact in, you want to focus on. And by the third year, you will hopefully either have established it or actually achieved your goals. So that's really, it was just great advice from both of them. And it really works. So you take from your predecessors those tools and knowledge that you can use, and then you eventually develop your own tools and create something new and different for the future. And I would have to say that my working relationship with Larry Jack here, as he became president, worked the same way. We would meet regularly, we would have discussions, we would just talk about how I did things, and you know, it's the pattern. So it's a wonderful system that we have here, that people do use history to create future.
One of your predecessors as president was Max Fisher. Tell me about it.
Max. I was so lucky with Max. Max didn't have a clue who I was when I became the campaign chair. In fact, I often laugh. He just didn't know. It wasn't like he kind of, after we played a little Jewish geography, knew some of my family because of my grandfather. And but it was one of these strange things. He didn't know Harold. He didn't know me. He had no idea, like, where, you know, how we came to leadership positions or were able to give, you know, campaign gifts of import. But he was, as he always is with every new campaign chair, he sits down and he talks to you, and it's like this big thing, you know, an audience with Max. You know, it's like, you know, it's an audience with God. And it was, you know, scary in the first part, and then you know, I'm never really afraid of people. I always feel that people are just people. I know that there are a lot of people who are intimidated. It just doesn't bother me. And to me, it can be a one-time experience or multiple experiences. It's not my way. So we went, I think the way that we really developed a relationship was that we traveled together to Chicago when we were having a meeting for the reorganization and the of the two organizations to become UJC. So
UJC?
United Jewish Communities, which is our present national organization, and it was a combination of United Jewish Appeal and the Council of Jewish Federations. And it was a very long process. I was involved in it for a really long time of trying to establish a new plan and a new paradigm for how we could have a national organization. And Max, of course, being Max and having been the chair or the president of both of them at one time or another, and the guru of the Jewish world, he came to this meeting in Chicago, and we traveled together. And I remember we were having breakfast on the final morning, and we were sitting listening to a compilation of reports, and he turned to me and he says, "Penny, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, to tell you the truth, Max, I think that in the end, there's going to be 5 men who are going to sit in a room and make the decision. And the rest of this is for show. Well, of course he laughed, but it probably was really true. And you notice I said men, because I really felt that really was what was going to happen. It was a very out-of-body experience that I had been spending all this time trying to have this new democratic approach to our Jewish world, and knowing that in the end it was going to be very much the same. But he really appreciated it, and from that point on, it was like we had this relationship. So he would say to Bob Aronson, "So, how's my girlfriend? How come you haven't brought her to see me lately?" And it just became a thing where, we just developed a really warm relationship. So it was such a great thing. He would ask me to come, or when I became president, there were many times I would do the right thing, and that would be to go and consult with Max and tell him things that we were planning or things that we wanted to do that would give him not only an update, but also kind of get his hexture on things that we felt we needed it. In any organization, probably of our stature and nature and history, there is usually one person who really made it happen, who has more influence and you respect as the elder. And even though you consider yourself to be the one in charge and you have all of these really wonderful people who are working with you and you are making decisions as a democratic organization, it's not a bad idea to get your elders' nod on many issues. And frankly, it's sometimes a very good thing. So I would do that. I have had experiences where there was something I really felt was important and Max had been kind of fighting against it. I actually can say that if you want to call it winning, I won on an issue that I thought was extraordinarily important. So that was because I think I had his ear, I had his respect. We had, I was able to influence him in the way of giving him the information that would help him to give the nod of approval, because we didn't really want to do this particular thing without his approval. And
can you tell us what that was?
Yeah, well, actually it was the joint distribution had a hunger relief problem. They had a $12 million plan to take care of the needy in the former Soviet Union, and this hunger relief program was falling, unless we all participated as federations as a whole, individually, not just from the monies that we allocated through our regular system, it was not going to succeed. And there were going to be millions, hundreds of thousands, I should say, of hungry people because the funds were running out. These people were left really bereft by the breakup of the former Soviet Union. And it was something that Max felt that JDC should just take the money out of their endowment. Well, they had already taken some of their money out of the endowment, but you break down an endowment too far and then you don't have any money as backup. And finally, after 2 years, I was able to talk to Max about it again, to really tell him that we thought from the leadership of Federation that it was a very important thing for us to be one of the people who were doing this, one of the organizations that were doing this, because this was not something that was going to go away. And without this one boost of fulfilling the $12 million commitment to that, and that was the $12 million obviously from us, without us paying our share, our portion, that many other people would not go along with the fold, because Detroit has a unique position in the Jewish world. When Detroit decides to do something, there are lots of people who follow, and it really did make a difference. And he did finally, he understood. He had held back as long as he thought, he could, but it was one of those, it was a moment in time where I truly believed in this. This was something that I thought was really necessary, and there was lots of support out there many people, not only within our own federation, but also in the Jewish community in the larger sense, who really understood that this was something that we needed to do, and we needed to do it now, and we couldn't wait for other resources to appear because they might not be there ever, and these people were going to die without this food. And I don't know, what do you do? And what do you take away from? There's a balance in every organization, and JDC can't just say, well, we'll just take all the money away from our children from our children's programs and give it to these people who are hungry. So, there's a balance, and it was a feeling of success for me, because I knew it was something that he wasn't wholeheartedly for, and he had good reasons about why he didn't feel it was the right move for Detroit. But little by little, I was able to change his perspective. Now, that's not an easy thing to do with Max, but I think he respected me for it, and he respected the fact that I was willing to come back to him again and again and fight for it. So that was, that was part of our relationship. It was great. Again, it wasn't that I was being confrontational. I was being sincere, and he was listening to me. And one thing about Max, I will tell you, he always listened. Max was, there are a lot of people of his leadership level and quality that they don't really listen. Max listened. It was I can't even tell you how much I felt a loss at his going. It was, to me, a very personal loss.
This is a tough question. In 3 years as president, what was the biggest challenge you faced? Community challenge.
Wow. Well, I would have to say that, obviously the biggest challenge is always that we don't have enough money to do everything. But on the other hand, there were 2 community challenges at the time that needed reorganization and change. And, it's difficult when you're dealing with a lot of agencies, and each agency has its own leadership and its own organizational requirements, and et cetera. But I find it very difficult when agencies don't function the way they need to. And so I would have to say the biggest challenge, and I don't know that I want to put this on, which agencies there were, but there were several agencies where, we recognized that there were great challenges within that agency, that great change needed to be made. That's one of the roles that you have to play as the president, that if you see things in the community that are part of your whole, then that need change, you have to be the one to affect change. So that's not always the most pleasant part of being a president. In fact, it's probably the most difficult part, because you are dealing then with other lay people as well as other professionals that maybe have a different viewpoint. But we have the responsibility as Federation to make sure that community dollars and community efforts are as forthright and honest as they need to be, and that they are as effective. Because when we raise money as a whole, we're representing every portion of our dollar that's allocated. So we have to be very careful about it. So I would have to say that dealing with those kinds of issues was about the most difficult thing that I did. It's a very fine line you walk. And it's not like you're elected as the President of the United States where people put their votes in. You are elected, but it's a little more vague than which red states and blue states, so to speak. So you have to be careful about how you do it. So that kept me up a number of nights.
What do you think is the biggest challenge that faces Federation today?
think the biggest challenge is having enough money and having enough donors to further all the good things that we do, because we do a lot of good things. And we will continue to have this really strong relationship with Israel, and we will continually have more to do here in our own local community, because we have populations, both the old and the young, that are going to require a lot of money. So we have the elderly population that are, thank God, everybody's, it's wonderful. People are leading a longer life, sometimes healthier, sometimes not. We're going to need continued funds to make sure that those people are cared for in an appropriate way. And I think that education in our community, which, that was a very big focus of my presidency, and it remains a very large focus for me. We need to support our Jewish educational system, because the only way we're going to grow Jews is to make them Jewish. And the only way they're going to understand about being Jewish as not just part of their identification is to understand who they are. And you can't do that without educating them Jewishly. So if we don't have enough money to give our children quality Jewish education, whether through day school or through supplementary school, then our Jewish community will diminish. And that's something I don't want to see on so many levels that I couldn't even begin to describe them. But we can't afford to be smaller than what we are, because our needs are going to continue to grow regardless of how many people support our efforts. And with the challenge of having so many other opportunities for people to become involved or to support other things, outside of Jewish causes, or to simply not support anything at all. We have lots of people who don't support anything. But how are we going to do it unless, how are we going to make this a better Jewish world unless we have Jewish children who understand about being Jewish? I grew up in a Jewish community. But I didn't have a problem with Jewish identity. Never occurred to me. But my children and my grandchildren could have a lot of problems with that. They don't live in Jewish neighborhoods where everybody in their school is Jewish unless they go to Hillel. I mean, as it happens for my children, or Akiva, or the Shivas. So how do we do that if we don't give them quality Jewish education in every area that we can service Jewish children? And I think that's going to be a challenge, because we don't have enough money currently to do that. And you have to balance the needs of the community. So it's going to continue to be a struggle. We're going to keep fighting, though.
You share something called Shalom Street.
Yes.
And that touches on what you just said about education
Yes.
a little bit, doesn't it?
It does. Shalom Street, which is our new children's museum, teaches about Jewish traditions and values and culture. It's not a religious institution in the sense that we do not teach about religion. We talk about it, but not in a sense where we are teaching Talmud or Torah. That's not our role. But we can talk about values that are Jewish, not that they don't translate into the greater values of the world, but they're particularly important to us as Jewish people. We tried to create a place that was fun and exciting, and someplace where you could learn without actually feeling like you were learning, that you weren't in school. And I do believe a value of a museum on any level where parents take their children is that both parents and children learn. So as we're teaching children, we're teaching things to parents who maybe didn't have the advantage of having a good Jewish education or background. It's also a great place in my mind to be able to teach diversity to the community. That by bringing children from other cultures and religions into that museum and talking about who and what we are, we can do a lot toward teaching tolerance and and in an environment where the positive sides of Jewish life are represented. The home, tzedakah, repairing the world, just Jewish environment. The environment of the world is a very important thing to everybody. But Jews actually have written about it in their very, very earliest writings of Jewish life. So we can teach those things to lots of people, certainly to our Jewish children, but hopefully to the world that's around us, and make hopefully a better life for everyone, because I think the people who understand Jewish life and culture and have a kind of an acceptance of it, treat people better. It'll be easier for Jews to live in a world if there is more tolerance of diversity.
You and your husband and family have a very major stake in education, and through the Millennium Campaign, I believe you gave $1 million for education. Could you tell us about that?
Well, actually, what we gave the $1 million for we participated in the Educational Trust. However, we also gave a Jewish Life Fund for the Millennium Fund that was for Israel experiences for young adults. I had a very strong belief that the young adult trips are at a great turning point for most young people. You know, there's a point in college where whatever they did at home, it's sort of non-existent in their college life. And now they're about to step into the next part of their life. And if they go on a trip to Israel and they feel connected to Israel, their perspective of Jewish life changes a great deal. I know what it did for my own children. Both of my sons went on the young adult trip in their time in the singles mission. Well, I will tell you that Ricky Blumenstein was a changed person from that point on. He was a person that maybe didn't even have quite a focus about what he might want to do, or he was working already, but he was definitely, you know, it's very hard to say that just because I lead the kind of life I do and I'm so active in the community, or that my husband is active in the community and cares so much, that your children are going to follow in your footsteps, because we know that isn't true. But Ricky went on this singles mission and turned into Mr. Super Jew. That's all I can tell you. He is amazing. And he's done many different things since that time. And that was already maybe, it's scary to say, it was probably 15 years ago. He encouraged his brother to go on a trip, his older brother, always a little farther behind than the younger brother in those things. It also changed his perspective. I think if you can send young people to make that connection to Israel, you can change the rest of their life. I will tell you that the trip to Israel that Harold and I took when we were what would be considered young adults, it was a young leadership mission. We were already probably in our early 30s, and it was a national mission. It definitely changed our life. That was a turning point for me, and for Harold too. He had already gotten a little excited because in the 60s, when the 67 war came, he actually called somebody to tell them that he wanted to increase his gift, because he was so thrilled that the Israelis had been so clever and so, they were standing up to the fight. He was so proud, so proud. He voluntarily called to increase his gift to a gift that I thought, oh my God, how could we afford that? I think it was $5,000 or $7,000, I don't know what it was. It was what I thought was way more money than we could afford, which just goes to tell you, you know, how life can change. People don't even realize what they can afford. But that trip, we were there for 2 weeks, and it was a true leadership training. I mean, we went all over Israel and really learned and talked to people. We were with a lot of other young people who were kind of in the same place that we were. We came home transformed. So as much as I can say that my background encouraged me to become involved, that my my early ORT experience encouraged me to become involved. Even my leadership training, I have to tell you that the most changing experience that I ever had was going to Israel. So I think that if you can take young people to Israel at that point, you can change their lives too and make their sense of responsibility, of history, and of commitment. It's a lifelong thing after that, because you never forget it. I love taking people to Israel who've never been there. I watch them, and it is such a joy to see them experience it, because it just brings back my first trip to Israel. I mean, actually, I feel like that every time I go, but it does bring back that, oh my God, feeling that you have when you go to Israel for the first time. People have no idea. They have no idea. So that's why I did it.
You were a leader on the miracle missions, I believe.
Yes, several times actually.
What were they?
Miracle missions are great. Miracle missions are, well, it's like, when you go to camp, and at the end of camp you have this great, it's like a great big party that they do at the end of camp, and all the awards are given, and everybody said, oh my goodness, what a wonderful thing. That's kind of like what a miracle mission is. It's like having your whole camp together, and you're having all these wonderful experiences, and everybody's having a good time, and you go off to your little activities during the day, and then you come together for these big events. You have such a wonderful sense of community. And people who absolutely felt no connection at all feel a connection. Now, I can't say that 100% of them come home and get involved or give money or do any of the other things that you want them to do, but you gave them an experience that is wonderful, and it's just a great feeling. It's just like being at the big football game, and you won, and that's how you feel.
Going from far away to much closer, you've taken some leadership roles in the city of Detroit as well. Do you feel a special responsibility here? Some of the things you're doing, what Detroit Symphony, what is it, the New Detroit?
Yes, New Detroit, I did while I was president. Community Foundation for Southeastern Michigan, and actually Henry Ford Hospital. Now, it's interesting because in some areas I became involved because I was kind of anointed to be a Jewish representative. Okay, now New Detroit you do as the president of the federation, because it's really it's kind of for really top community leaders representing their organization. It was an interesting experience. I can't say that I was particularly effective, but I was a representative. But Henry Ford Hospital System, I was sort of anointed as the Jewish representative. There are not a lot of Jewish people on that. Again, you have to represent the Jewish community. You better be able to say something about the Jewish community. So a couple of times when things have happened, I have been able to speak my mind. I must have not offended anybody, because I moved up in the organization and I'm on the executive committee. Now that they're planning to build a hospital in our community, it turned out to be a very fortuitous thing that I was there, because I really think that we can make this great synergy. It's going to be right across the street from the Jewish Community Campus. There are so much that the Jewish Community Campus can use and effectively at the hospital, because they have a population that needs immediate assistance and care, and there will be people there on a 24/7 that will be available to them. It'll be a very effective association. And actually, I think it turns out to be a very good organization, much different than I thought. I didn't realize that, truthfully, hospitals are charitable institutions. They do an awful lot to care for the indigent. They have a real public responsibility. But I would have to say the Detroit Symphony Orchestra just is because I absolutely love the symphony, and it's just an organization that I'm involved with on a just a personal level of loving the music and feeling that it's very important for a community like ours, Detroit, and it's metropolitan area to have a fine symphony orchestra. I think that culture is a very important part of our lives, and we need to support it. And I think that too many people don't realize, they kind of take for granted that we have things in our city that as if they were just going to exist on their own. It's not true. We need support for cultural institutions, because what kind of world would it be if we didn't have any culture at all? Life doesn't work that way. You're a whole person when you also include culture in your life. But the Community Foundation of Southeastern Michigan, I would have to say, is probably most closely aligned with the things that I do here, because it's all about helping people and giving money and doing it in the right way. It's truthfully a grant-making organization, but it does some wonderful things in the sense that it can pool money, make a real change and a difference in various areas, and do things to help other communal organizations be better organizations, which they've done twice now, and it's been so effective. They had the Touch the Future campaign, which helped all these community organizations recognize the importance of endowment and have endowment campaigns that will effectively keep those organizations alive for many, many more years. And they did another program that helped organizations learn about how to better organize themselves and how to go out and raise money. Not just the raising of the money, because that was different. That was 9 or 10 organizations that ended up being able to do that. This was about how do you create within your organization the ability to raise money and endowment money. And it was such a wonderful community program, because they could never have afforded the expertise that was given through the Community Foundation. So aside from the fact that they are helping in so many areas, and I chair the Program and Distribution Committee, so I really see everything that comes in and out of our organization and how effective we are with the amounts of money that we have. So that's a great organization.
You said a little bit about your children.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe just tell us a little about your grandchildren.
Oh, my grandchildren. The reason you have children. The reason you keep them alive, yes. I have 11 grandchildren, and it is just, it's really the benefit of raising a family is to get these grandchildren, who are, of course, all absolutely adorable, but they're also very close to my heart. I have managed to establish a really good relationship and a close one with each one of them, in spite of the fact that out of the 11, 7 live much farther away. My oldest grandchild is 9, and the youngest was just a year old. Every year, I had 1, 2, or 3 grandchildren. It's been a very interesting experience. I think there was 1 year between Ricky's 2 youngest that we missed, but aside from that, every year we've had 2 or 3 grandchildren. But they are, it's a blessing. And one of the things that grandparents can do is, by spending time with their grandchildren, have discussions that their parents never would have. Now, some of them are a little young for that yet, but the ones that are a little older, if you develop a relationship with them that is close enough, they know they have somebody who is unquestionably loves them, but also is a good person to talk to if they have a little problem. So that's what I've tried to do. I spend time individually somehow with each one. The ones that are out of town, we have sleepovers at the hotel, one by one. And the ones who are in town, of course, I get much more quality time with them. But I manage, and I'm lucky I have the ability to get there to see them, because it's not so easy once they get so busy to get them to come to see me. But next month, when we're celebrating this big birthday for my parents, everyone will be here. It'll be a unique experience for me to have all of my family, including my parents, in one place at one time. I'm a lucky person.
Is there a life's lesson that you would like to pass on to your grandchildren?
I guess if I had to say what I kind of, follow your heart. Don't be afraid. Everybody's afraid. I'm not a big one for challenges, I don't look at things as challenges. I just say, I'm always surprised maybe when things are never as hard as I think they were going to be. And because I'm a great believer in taking on new things, keep at it, because I feel it's keeping me alive and young. Somebody asked me once, was it really hard to give up the presidency? And I said, no, it isn't because I didn't love it. It was the best job that I ever had, because it was so rewarding in so many ways, in spite of all the angst you have with a job like that. But it was time for somebody else to come in and put their energy into it. I think that when you let other people come in and do new things, you continue to grow. And you go on and do something different, and you continue to grow. And that's what I would always say. Don't get stuck in a rut. Try something new. It's really a way to keep yourself young and to invigorate every job that you do, because everybody gets a little tired after a while, and things get to be the same. And the little things start to fall by the wayside, and you don't take care of them. And guess what? When you're new on the job, you're looking at everything, and you're putting all your energy into it. It's a better way to do things. So that's what I would tell them.
Is there anything I've forgotten to ask you, Penny?
Oh, I can't imagine that there is. It seems to me that I've been talking forever.
It's been a joy. Thank you very much.
And thank you.